Thanks, Erica. It's a real pleasure to come out and speak to you. Firstly, because the sun is out, which is very much is not in Wales at the moment, so that's nice. But also nice to come really to be amongst friends and be able to talk a bit more casually and not really have everything to prove, which is quite often the way in kind of academic kind of presentations. So I'm not going to treat this as an academic presentation. I'm not going to prove my chops in the literature or kind of methods, particularly because Phil's in the room. I failed. What I'm going to do is just chat about the stuff that we've been doing in the Welsh Economy Research Unit and in my own research for the last 4 or 5 years across 3 or 4 different projects, some of which are published, some which are entering publication hopefully, and some of which I think will never be published. And just to understand in what sorts of ways digital incursions into production, intermediation, and consumption are likely to impact on places, different spatial scales, and really different kinds of places. Hopefully this will go forward. Let's go forward. Enter maybe? No. If I click or... Okay, that's what most of part of this arises from the fact that we've got a project, an ERDF project, a new project in Cardiff, 5-year project looking at the impact of broadband on SMEs and social enterprises, focusing on productivity. But we've used that project to jump into a wider range of areas of kind of investigation. And what we've noticed really, particularly in the first few years of this interest in the impact of automation, is that the framing for the impact of automation on the economy tends to have been dominated by discussions around occupations and industries more than anything else. So we've seen reports, particularly the original kind of Frey and Osborne, which I think is 2012, was very much what sort of occupations are likely to be impacted by automation. And then future work, sometimes based on Frey and Osborne, sometimes in opposition to it, like the OECD, ONS have got into this space recently, has looked at occupations and industries as the primary way in which we think about how the internet and internet-enabled technologies impact on the economy and then society. But of course we know that industrial revolutions of any nature impact on places and across space differently. If you look at the first industrial revolution in the UK, or rather in England, spreading then to Wales, that dragged people into towns and cities in massive numbers and left people in rural areas often on kind of starvation wages, with very much greater returns to be had in cities, changed the face of Britain, and really roped the infrastructure of Britain in ways that we're still dealing with now. If you look at HS2 basically takes the same path as railways took in the late 18th, early 19th centuries as they were servicing the emerging industries of Britain. So we need to think about how industrial change treats with places. I'm going to use 3 lenses to look at this and then have a kind of at the end, an attempt at thinking about looking at relations between places and the relative impact on places. So I say some of this is quite discursive. It's got various projects and so on, and papers and project reports are available if you want them. The work variously features colleagues in the Welsh Economy Research Unit. Dylan Henderson runs our broadband project. Also Max Monday, as some of you might know, and other colleagues there. And it's part of the EU ERDF, and I thought to find the map, the logo. Imagine there's stars in blue on there, otherwise I'll get into trouble. I'm looking at rural-urban impacts, city-regional impacts, and a rolling challenge for cities, and then I say this idea of a kind of an index of vulnerability and opportunity. So there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm going to rattle through it, but hopefully we can pick up on things that are interesting to you at the end, rather than focusing on one thing, which might bore some of you rotten. As I said, what we see is that in the past, up until more recent work, future advocacy, then some work on parliamentary constituencies, but really we've looked at the impact of automation on particularly production rather than anything else, as a way of understanding the economics of the internet. That kind of tends to be national scale, industry scale, and occupational scale. And where analyses have been narrower, where analyses have been at a lower spatial scale, they tend to be narrower. So the work done by Brookings and by, I think, Bernolfson's done some work. I think maybe Roderick has a robot in US cities, which is great, but it's just robots, just industrial robots. So when you look at smaller spatial scales, you tend to narrow into your definition of automation, internet, and this kind of technology stuff. So we're trying to take a more holistic view on the impacts of this stuff at smaller spatial scales. And what we try to do in some of our work is accept that things beyond industry and occupation affect place prospects. So for example, my own work, which I've published on, still available for citing. Jones 2015, should you wish to talk about citing it. Looking at how where capital is owned has an impact on place prospects. Because you might have a lot of factories, but if that Volkswagen factory is in southern Germany as opposed to southern Spain, the prospects for that region will be different. So looking at, capital ownership matters, I think. Urban regional hierarchies, we know that different places will prosper depending on the relationship within the kind of functional hierarchy of countries. Obviously, Phil's last book is a very good example of how this plays out or doesn't. Urban-rural function at smaller spatial scales and density will have an impact. Innovation, be that pure innovation or how ecosystems can translate, adapt and apply innovation will have an impact way on global value chains, and citizen behaviour as well will have an impact on how places respond to technology. All these things will mediate artificial intelligence. I've got one slide on rurality. This is just to illustrate what we're doing in our broadband project, which is the impact of superfast broadband on business productivity in Wales, across the whole of Wales. And this is just to make the point that, firstly, we know there's an urban-rural divide. Now, this is not AI, but this is adoption of superfast broadband and adoption of the technologies it enables, like sort of cloud, accountancy, e-technologies for sales and purchasing, marketing and so on. So how are companies responding to the availability of the internet, depending on whether they are rural or urbanly situated? And you can see this table, which is from our 2018 Digital Maturity Survey, available online. We've got 3 years worth of this data now. We'll have 5 by the end of the project, so a good longitudinal study. In this particular data set from 2018, we've got 450 companies responding, so a reasonable N. And here we're just looking at a basket of digital behaviours around things like e-marketing, around things like how you do your accounts, around how you use the internet, in terms of social media and other things, to give a score to SMEs and social enterprises, and then reporting on that score across 4 broad categories, so whether how most engaged companies down to the least engaged. And you see that in Wales, that digital-rural divide is a problem. So if we look at the digitally embedded, so the companies who are at the top end of this digital maturity ladder, if you like, of course there's a rising tide, it will become more internet aware over time, It's very difficult to control for when you're looking to do longitudinal kind of stuff and match it together across different years, so you can get more embedded in the digital world as time goes on. You can see that there's not that much of a difference between rural and urban companies in terms of digital embeddedness. So almost 20% of our urban companies are fully au fait with digital procedures and ways of running their business, about 16.5% in rural areas. But you look at those businesses that are digitally disengaged, and you can see that over twice as many rural businesses, proportionally, are not engaging with the internet compared to urban businesses. Now, when we can stitch these data together, say we have, we should have a couple of thousand responses over 4 years by the time this project is finished, and as long as we can deflate their internet kind of engagement to be able to compare properly across years, we'll be able to say whether that's due to different business sizes in the rural areas compared to the urban areas of Wales. Is it due to sector? So Colco's work, which talks about kind of broadband-related sectors as opposed to non-broadband-related sectors. He argues that the productivity benefits accrue certain sectors of connectedness. So we can look more deeply when we develop data at whether these outcomes from rural and urban businesses are because they are rural, or because they are small, or because they are in a particular sector, or a particular kind of characteristics, so the regressions will follow. You can see, a priori, this rural-urban divide in the take-up of digital does seem to be a real problem in a peripheral region like Wales. I'm happy to talk about that at the end, should you be interested in it, if you have any rural areas in your city-ready boundary, which you may not. The problem with that rural-urban framing, which is the way in which the UK certainly has talked about the broadband issue, it's all about the last 5% who don't get super-fast broadband. It's all about the disconnected on the Outer Hebrides or the mid part of Wales or whatever. There's always somebody on the telly. I always know there's an entrepreneur on the TV in Wales anyway, who's moved to the wilds at the back of Hay on Wire somewhere, and is out complaining they can't run their business because they haven't got the internet. And you think, well, stay in friggin' London then, what are you doing? I don't know when it's expecting you to run your business fast broadband. Leave that on the side. The problem with urban rural divide in a binary fashion is it ignores the different kind of functions, different parts of the urban landscape. And we know, obviously, that different parts of the urban landscape have different functions economically. There's a little bit of work by Elizabeth Mack in the States looking at the way in which, again, this is broadband connectivity, not AI as such, the way in which connectivity impacts on productivity. This is US county data. And she argues there are a number of places which don't do so well from being connected. And one of those places, one of the sorts of places, are post-industrial areas. So in America, this is largely Midwest and Rust Belt, which even when they have good broadband, don't tend to see productivity take up in the business cohorts. And the other sorts of places, in a different paper that she wrote, suggest that if you are a connected locality next door to an already technologically concentrated urban centre, you don't tend to get the benefit. And you can imagine how this process plays out. So if you are a commuting location, a peri-urban commuting location next to an already well-developed technological centre, even if you become well connected, if you're just supplying labour to the technological kind of elephant next door, then maybe you don't see your own firms benefit from that connectivity. Maybe people are staying in their houses and working with their gross value added declared in the urban centre. So there are interesting kind of tweaks about how connectivity benefits or doesn't different places. And this is a paper we had in the local economy earlier this year. So we looked at whether this might work or not work in the Cardiff City Region. Cardiff City Region is divided, or has been divided in the binary fashion here, with the coastal authorities, Cardiff and Newport, which are two cities, Bridgend, which is a manufacturing sort of town, and then the very northern and Monmouthshire, relatively rich urban, relatively rich rural counties, this darker green band. That's the already relatively prosperous coastal area, and then the old coal valleys, I live in Ormond and Taff there, and the other four are all fairly heterogeneous. They hate I said that, very homogenous I should say. Post-coal mining areas suffering lots of economic problems, social problems and so on. And if you look at a priori, how you expect broadband air automation to impact different places, then the sort of characteristics which drive take-up of technologies, drive returns for employees from technological incursion to the workplace, tend to favour the already rich coastal area. So what we have here is the regions in grey are the regions which are the already poor Five Valleys authorities. And being higher up the table is worse. So you can see, for example, if you look at the qualifications of the population, then the worst 5 authorities are the already poor valley area. And the issue we have is that although there's an emerging consensus on some sort of U-shaped returns to employees from additional technology capital, it's clear that populations, areas, people with bachelor's level qualifications tend to benefit most from technological incursion into the workplace. So, Phil?
The names you've got at the top, could you show us on the map where they are? I don't know where Lano Gwent is.
Yes, of course. So if you look at these lighter green in the middle, these are all the coal belt was concentrated on these. Rhondda, Taffmouth, the Philly, Betna Gwent. So basically the hard to pronounce ones are the poor ones. I mean, broad brushing. Those 5 authorities are in grey in the tables, and they are for example, the 5 authorities here in the middle, the qualified population, bachelor's degree level. I could have chosen A levels or NVQs. It doesn't really matter when you put the line. Those 5 are the worst in terms of qualified population. You might expect employees living in those areas, this is residence-based data, employees living in those areas will be less likely to benefit from inclusion technology who don't have qualifications. And you can see that generally the grey authorities, the valleys and coasts are aggregated in the bottom two rows, do worse in terms of their employees, or resident population, in terms of their preparedness, if you like, to take advantage of technology. There are some, obviously it's not, wages are very poor, a very poor dummy for this, but wages again is some sort of dummy for employee qualifications, quality and so on. So there's nothing complicated, there's no regressions, these are generally high quality published data from ONS. And if you look at firms then, what we've done, this is Henson Jones, Dylan and myself. Again, on the left hand side, what we've got is looking at firms that are in industries which Colpigo says benefit most from broadband internet access. So these are management consultancy, academia, utilities do very well for broadband. There's American data, obviously there's some matching to be done between the sectors, but it's not that difficult. And then other sectors which don't do so well, surprisingly, are things like retail. And you can see that if you look at the firms within these two sets of parts of the city region, the poor periphery has many fewer firms proportionally that are in broadband ready sectors than coasters. So in terms of both resident labour and your firms, it looks like the policy of outcome for increasing importance of connectivity in economic production is a widening of economic inequality across space in the region. If these kind of a priori data are borne out as technology, as access to cloud provided services and so on becomes more important. Because firms in the valleys tend to be smaller. The one on the right here is the size distribution variable. They tend to be fewer per head of population, so there are fewer firms in the first place in the old industrial valleys. So for lots of reasons, both around the population living there and the sort of firm population based in the valleys, we might expect that as broadband becomes more important, as internet access becomes more important, as being digitally enabled and embedded becomes more important, you might see a widening of income dispersion, productivity and so on between the already poor valleys and the coast. And this is no, we talk in the paper, of course, about things like the role of commuting. For people like me, I'm very digitally embedded. I work in the train all the way up here. I live in the grey bit, but my GVA is, as such as it is declared in the coast bit. So how far does me living in the valleys benefit valleys? Well, it does, because my wife's, my mother-in-law lives 100 yards away. I spend a lot of money in the valleys. I'm never going to move. So my mother-in-law lives 100 yards away. But for other commuters, you can argue, particularly in Wales now, the big thing for Wales is South Wales has become a commuter hub for Bristol. So you need to think about how value is created from employees who are cross-boundary commuting, even between the kind of, within the city region, if you like, between the poor and rich bit, or even between city regions. Again, this is just an interesting kind of tweak on how these things play out. The third element that I'm going to talk about, which is, this is much more, so I sent the first draft of this, I think it was Journal of Economic Geography. Whenever I do this, I think, why do I do this? Why do I kick myself by sending stuff to Joe? Because nobody edits for Joe, do they? Because they're arses, right? They just can't be bothered being nice, right? And I sent this thing away to them, and they just said, we don't do discursive stuff, basically, we don't have any data. But I think it's interesting, even though it's not necessarily kind of high quality publishing. What I've said so far would suggest that cities are quite well placed. That if you look across the geographies of UK, Europe or America, cities will be places where top technology agglomerates, aggregates, finds its kind of application, where people then move to take advantage of that technology, both as users and as creators. And cities would seem to be beneficiaries from a more digitized world. So, this is against kind of the freedom idea that the world is flat and we can all live where we like, because actually people don't want to live in the middle of nowhere and not see anybody else. That's not how particularly knowledge rulers we're all kind of made, actually, all human, aren't we? But I think there's another level of analysis that nobody seems to be doing, which is around how cities create value and how that will change going forward. And I think that we need to think more about this than we have in the past, because I think this is quite important in terms of public policy. And again, I think this is probably where I lost Journal of Economic Geography. I started in about 3000 BC, a short kind of view of history. This is a great quote, which I've used a couple of times actually, from a guy called Mark Grubesic, who's an archaeologist, anthropologist. And he has this lovely quote in his book, which says, these two complementary areas, the urban and the rural, the urban and the kind of peri-urban, produce experience an unequal level of exchange. The periphery, rich in resources, provides goods to the densely populated central area. The centre provides a return in the form of ideologies and cultural influence. Well, that hasn't changed over 2,000 years, 5,000 years, since he's talking about the first urbanisation in the Near East, cities like Uruk, a very long time ago. And of course, what cities did at the time is they created value by being places where value could be created through the aggregation of agricultural surplus. So you had cities being the place where trade first emerged. So as soon as humans got good at agriculture, and there was surplus grain, surplus barley, and other products, surplus meat, then cities emerged, towns and cities emerged as marketplaces where you could exchange to the benefit of, with or without currency, to the benefit of both parties, where you could develop consistent approaches to get economies of scope and scale, or things like when you create agricultural implements, you start doing it in a more kind of formalised way, which benefits all the farmers in your periphery. You can send out teams of ditch diggers where they're needed. You can create a soldier class, to protect the farms of the people who are under your jurisdiction. And cities created value in this way through the specialisation, division of labour that we all know is the heart of economics and the heart of value creation in many ways. And this process kind of carried on and changed in minor ways over the following 4,500 years. You had a knowledge economy on top of that with the universities emerging sort of 1,000 years ago. But really that didn't kind of change much until the Industrial Revolution. And of course, the Industrial Revolution, what happens is production of valuable goods moves from agricultural areas into cities. So no longer does the stuff that people want and need emerge from farms. It starts to emerge from cities. We start to manufacture products. Our initial products are energy products, the mechanization which enables the manufacture of basic materials, textiles and so on, agriculture to happen better. But of course then manufactured goods in a kind of solid Maslow kind of low level sense give rise to consumer goods. And this all happens in the city. And the city delivers value through production of manufactures. And increasingly then over time through the production of knowledge, through the production of services. We now are, we now at a time where this is the point where I hold up my Microsoft phone and realise I'm not necessarily speaking as a technologically advanced kind of purveyor of modern technology, but this is just a hunk of plastic and glass without the services that go on it. It can't do anything without for you Google or Apple on the other end. So obviously cities have tended to be the place that have delivered services, be it leisure services, consumption services, knowledge services, through based in universities. And that process cities have adapted to and been successfully resilient to change in moving from a manufactured base to a service. So I've got a slide which I don't show here, which shows a reduction in manufacturing employment in cities from between 1971 and 2011. And even cities which were not very manufacturing oriented like Cardiff would have gone from 30-35% manufacturing down to 7-8%. Birmingham's gone from well over 50% employment in manufacturing down to I think something like 15. So the cities have negotiated that this change reasonably well. But of course they've been winners and losers. And typically cities in the north of England have lost, as Worker, Centre for Cities, Roma and other people, Phil, has shown, there's a north-south divide in the way that cities have been able to deal with, respond to, and move into new spaces. And my argument, I guess, in this paper, which probably is destined to remain a working paper, is that we are going through a similar process for cities now. But there is an additional an interesting tweak this time, in that the process of value creation, when it's moved from individual hunter-gatherers to farms, to larger farms, to towns and then cities, has always been spatially set, spatially embedded somewhere. But that's changing. So the first thing that we see is that cities in the West have largely lost their primacy in the provision of services. Pardon me, provision of manufactures. So firstly, we have abandoned, or multinationals have outsourced and moved production of manufactured goods to Asia, largely. To other places. Yes, there's some reshoring, there's working on, but in terms of scale, we're talking about a very large movement of employee jobs involved in manufacturing moving to Asia. So cities have given up, voluntarily or otherwise, their role as a centre of manufactured goods in the West, particularly UK and US. Germany would argue, no, we haven't, maybe, to some degree. And what's followed them, in a more subtle way, and not to Asia necessarily, is the primacy in the role of creating services, or creating value from services. And the interesting thing, I think, this time is that the role of value, the process of value creation and value realization in certain consumer services has not gone anywhere spatial. I argued last week when I spoke that what we have now is effectively a single sui generis, unique region, which is sort of based on the west coast of America, but not entirely, actually consists of a handful of firms who are capturing a larger and larger proportion of value from service consumption, certainly from consumers, but also from intermediation and from production across a wide range of activities. So hands if you've got a Netflix account. So much that's like £100 a month between us all. Hands up if you've got either Napster or Spotify or something similar in terms of music. It's another 50 odd quid. Yeah. If you use Uber Eats.
Sorry?
Uber Eats. Yeah.
Uber Eats,
which is the spin-off of Uber. Use Uber? Yeah, use Uber. Okay. So if you think about the proportion of consumption, in our case expenditure, that represents, and the amount of value remaining locally from that consumption behavior, there's a sucking out, there's a hollowing out of value from places, including cities, to effectively aspatial organisations, which has always been there, but is growing and enabled by, depending on the technology we've been talking about for the last half an hour. And this, I think, is in some ways a stronger threat than the civilization of the economy was in the UK, for cities particularly. Because what we are seeing is the automation of employment. So when you move from having a real person at the end of a call centre for car insurance to having a bot, you not only get rid of that job, but you now are giving money to probably something like QuickBooks, a cloud-type provider. You're paying Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure for the web space to host your cloud bots. The building you built, the 10-storey building we've got at Edinburgh and Cardiff, for example, which is currently full of call centre operatives, will be not full of call centre operatives in a decade's time. Because they'll be gone. Because nobody will be ringing up to buy car insurance. Or even ringing up when they have an accident. Or so few people will be that these jobs will shrink. And this, and so in intermediation, in the consumption I talked about, they're talking about the impact of Amazon deliveries on congestion in cities. Amazon, French again, we're taxing Amazon because they're holding up urban areas in France. Delivery drivers are being paid almost nothing, with impossible schedules, burning out. Have you seen the Ken Loach film? Yeah. So what we have is a sucking out the value from production is gone, but intermediation consumption is also being driven out of places and into a very small number of effectively spatial organisations. And there's a problem here in a number of ways, I think, which I again argue in the working paper. Firstly, there's a problem in terms of employment. you know, and the basic enemy that emerges, if I use Mark's kind of term, for not having a job. Universal basic income to replace it. There's an issue there. There's an issue in terms of the fabric of our cities. So we've transitioned urban CBDs towards the provision of services, but largely, certainly in most cities in the UK, with obviously one or two exceptions, fairly low value or middle value services with fairly standard process-based white-collar jobs, which are going to be fairly shy over the next 10 years. Rather than really the high-value knowledge economy stuff which is going to be using the robots, using the algorithms, with the exception of universities. So what we do with those urban spaces is very interesting. If we're genuinely left with high-rise buildings empty of staff, do all the high-rise buildings with empty students that we know we're all building, which is the response to reducing demand for retail and employment space in the city centres has been almost universally the building of sleeper flats, which will never be used, but flipped 4 times before they ever get to notionally open. So it seems to me cities have not really responded to this. And you know, at the same time as we're going to be retraining all these people to do different jobs, the fact remains, you know, if you spend your money on, it's very rare that I quote the Daily Mirror as a my reference. There used to be some of the Daily Mirror and the Centre for Retail Research, which suggested that of every £100 you spend on the high street, about 16 or 17 pounds stays in the local economy, when using taxes, whatever that means. Spend online, about 6 or 7 pounds maximum stays in the local economy. So you are reducing the tax take, you are reducing incomes, at the same time you have to transition your economy to something new, which is the problem. Which is why even the Tories, or the old style Tories, were talking about an internet tax on some of these operators. Finally, very finally, I'm going to talk about our attempt to tie all this up in a metric which gives some sort of idea of where regions sit in terms of the onrushing or ever onrushing. These are waves of innovation. This is not like a binary recession on-off. Constant waves of technological adaptation, constant waves of automation will affect places over forever. And we're trying to work out how we can think about how regions sit relatively in terms of their responsiveness to these sorts of demands. Now, there are obviously implications for regions. I'll be talking about 2 regions here for reasons of data, which is very unfortunate because I'd like to do it at a lower level. Like the city regions, you can't at the moment. But we know that all the stuff I've talked about will impact on the way the places respond, places can take advantage of new activities. And we know that prior rounds of economic development, economic change, have left the same places disadvantaged. So it's a really, I suppose, is an argument that there are certain sorts of places, sorts of people, often overlapping each other in interesting ways, which just miss out on economic disruption and so on. And there's a well, I haven't read it fully yet, a really interesting paper just out in Nature, Human Behaviour on this, which that URL will lead you to. So we're trying to adopt a vulnerability and resilience framework to think about how regions respond to technological change. When I've given this paper in the past, I tend to spend all the questions then talking about what you mean by resilience, which, you know, so I might just ditch the resilience word in total. This idea of being vulnerable to change and having opportunity potentially from that change. It's like 2 different areas that regions may be playing in. Places which have a lot of jobs which might be disrupted, disappear. Places which have the opportunity to take advantage of new technologies and so on. Trying just to wrap that up in a metric, and I'm not going to go through those vulnerability on the time, but you obviously have the slides, and I'm more than happy to chat about this afterwards and in the longer term should you want to. And when we think about vulnerability, there are huge issues about our unit of analysis. You know, often at regional level, you will know this because you work with policymakers, the region is held to be some sort of homogenous single unit rather than the people who live there, the people who commute in or out, the firms which are there, different networks which might be within those regions. All those things really matter in terms of vulnerability. Because different parts of the region will be differently vulnerable, will be differently opportune. There will be firms who will be really vulnerable in region A, but really optimistic in region B. And they will move out of region A to concentrate in region B, which is a problem for region A. You know, so we think about the unit of analysis, which you know, again, we raise these issues in the paper without any real kind of solution for now. But we know that there are certain things which affect regional resilience, vulnerability, ability to take advantage of new opportunities. Ron Boschma has argued for a long time that regional variety is a good thing. The more different stuff you got going on in a region, especially if it's related to each other, gives you a more resilient economic base, you can take advantage of new opportunities. Other people, Krugman included, a different view on kind of this dispersion of activities across regions, whether it's good or a bad thing, where there's a kind of U-shape, your returns to variety and so on. I'm not going to go into all that. I didn't say variety seems to be important. Obviously entrepreneurship, obviously human capital, ability to innovate, innovation ecosystems, where you export to, if you export at all these things are likely to impact on your resilience or vulnerability. And some of those will also impact on your ability to take opportunity from new markets and so on. We've tried to capture all this as far as we can in an index of 10 variables. And I'll talk about the index in a second, which you will know I'll find lots of fault with. I'm more than happy to change it. This will change. I'll explain in a second when I come to the results. So our exposure variable, how exposed the region is to industrial change based on technological, economic change based on technological inclusion, includes our industries at high risk, from the Frey Osborne type work. It includes our routine occupations, so our kind of routine white collar work or routine blue collar work, which will be pushed out by robots, maybe not ditch digging. Those blokes dug ditches yesterday and turned my electricity off tools when I was working at home. I wish there was a robot on that project, but there was some bloke with a cigarette and a hard hat taking the wrong thing. That happened for a long time, I think. I've got conversations with employees as a percentage of GVA, because so all the northern English regions and Wales create more than half of their GVA from wages. All of the southern English regions create more than half their GVA from non-wage income. And if you create more than half your GVA from wages, you might be expected to be more exposed to automation of work than if you don't. If you're a pension holder or a dividends earner sitting in the south. So there's an interesting dichotomy in regions in the UK, Scotland, in terms of how regions create value added. I've also got a Herfinale index in there, again to Ron's point, Boschma, Martin. The variety is an indicator of resilience, so you've got to be concentrated in a few sectors, it's a bad thing, or interesting. That's the only metric that inner London doesn't absolutely smack out of the park on, because inner London is very concentrated in financial services. That's a good or bad thing, we can argue. I'm not sure. Some of these indicators may need tweaking. In terms of the opportunity advantage of new technologies, again, I've got percent here with post-16 qualifications, because you know people with higher qualifications are more likely to be labour augmented, technology related, rather than labour replacing technology augmented, so you're doing a job, a robot has to do a job better, I guess, allegedly. Automation is good for us. R&D spend per inhabitant as a proxy of innovation, that's new stat data. Gross fixed capital formation as a percentage gross value added. For a recent 3-year period, a some sort of indication of up-to-date capital, because places with new capital might be expected to be more well placed. So if you've got a brand new factory building EVs in Sunderland, you are better off than if you've got old capital like we have making steel. Because nobody's putting gross fixed capital formation into Port Talbot, but obviously we've seen new investment in Sunderland EVs, so that's tries to capture that kind of readiness in terms of physical capital. And then businesses for FTEs, again, more businesses per FTE is a more entrepreneurial economy, one might argue, more able to be fleet of foot, take advantage of new opportunities in the future. These are the data. They're a mess in some ways. They're quite good data, but they're very variable data. So most of them are percentages. Some are very narrow in range. So industries in high risk, and that's 2 regions in the UK, so we can get data for. It goes from 30% to 34%, it's not a very big stretch. Others have wider stretches. So, for example, compensation employs a percentage. So I think it's the northeast, one of the northeast and that's 2 regions has only 14%, has 62.5% of its GPA from wages. In the south, one of the southeastern regions. There's 1, 2, 3 there. This is the most useful thing I've done in the last hour. Give somebody to share.
That's all right, thank you.
This has been the best bit, trust me. So the data are very variable. So if you want a basket indicator, we have to amend these data somehow. The worst one there is R&D spent per inhabitant, which ranges from 67 euros per inhabitant up to 2,000 euros per inhabitant. That latter one being London West, which are local universities in it. So that, again, these data are kind of variable. So what we've effectively done, in layperson terms, I'm a layperson, is we've taken the distribution across every variable, we've set the maximum instance to 1, the minimum instance to 0, and we've just spread the distribution across 1 to 0. So in every case, the maximum number is now 1, the minimum response is 0, and we retain the distribution, the spaces between the regions, the 36 regions, I think, across those data. So effectively what we've done is we've weighted each one of our 10 variables equally by setting them between 0 and 1, and there are arguments. So when we presented this in Birmingham before Christmas, this paper from our colleagues in Cork, where they've got some regressions, we might be able to start weighting some of these different variables, but that's a bit, I think that's ahead of time. Just trying to work out this rule at all is where we are at the moment. And what we do is we've got 4 variables which looks at exposure and 4 variables which looks at opportunity. And they are different, and we've run some tests. There's no big autocorrelation in here. All these are not correlated with each other. Interestingly, exposure is highly correlated negatively with opportunity. So regions which are exposed also don't have much opportunity. But in terms of the individual 8, you couldn't throw one out because it's highly autocorrelated with any. So that's what we've done. What scores do we get? Well, let's look at exposure first. I'm nearly there, by the way. Now, interestingly here, there's a strong north-south divide, but this is north-south England divide, really. And we're looking at regions in the north of England which are heavily exposed to the incursion of automated technology in production, in other words. And what we have is this swathe, the region we're in now, in West Midlands, across to Sheffield, kind of Yorkshire area, so Yorkshire, Sheffield's not very much to it, and then up to the northeast as well. And you can see that the worst ones, now what we've done, sorry I should have said, we just averaged the scores across the 4 metrics in each case to get an aggregate score for exposure. And we think the most exposed region, it seems to be West Midlands. Now again, the good thing is, unlike an econometric black box, you can dig back into data to see what's driving that exposure level. We haven't done that yet, but we think obviously it's manufacturing, where there's a suggestion there's still quite a lot of automation to occur, even though my Fiat Tipo was built in 1985 by robots in Turin. So we've been doing this quite a long time, but you know, OECD and others reckon there's still automation to happen in manufacturing. Some of these northern cities, Liverpool's a good example of this, Manchester too, have invested quite heavily in routing services, call centre type activities. So again, that's an exposed occupation, stroke industry, in terms of automation. And you can see that some of the best ones, and this is where I think our data are a little bit, our metrics, our variables are a little bit dodgy, because this seems to really advantage rural places like the Highlands and Islands, which I think is a worry, because I think these places are really more exposed. Although you might argue, if we are talking about largely farming, tourism, some of these areas, actually, what's going to happen in technology in those areas is going to drive lots of employment. It may be fine, you know, but that's something for discussion. And Cornwall, I'd say, looks quite good. Wales, it's nice to present a map on which Wales isn't the worst, for once. I think that is because in Wales we have quite a high proportion of employment in public services, and do you all know who the biggest purchaser of fax machines in the world is? You want to guess?
Is it doing the quiz?
No. It's the NHS.
I was going to say Welsh Economy.
So the NHS generally in the UK is the world's biggest purchaser of fax machines. You ain't going to be looked at by a robot nurse anytime soon. So if you've got, you know, lots of universities, lots of social services, lots of health services, lots of public services generally, I think you come up a bit better on this metric because those jobs are not in the early waves of incursion from digital. Whereas there's less of that stuff happening in the English regions because they haven't had devolution, they haven't had the protection that Wales has had and Scotland has had in some ways from austerity. All these data vary from 2013 up to 2017, 18, so they kind of cover a lot of the last decade. In terms of opportunity, again, there's a clear north-south divide here. Now, Wales is pretty bad because we don't have the firms, you know, we don't have the qualified population, we don't have the R&D spend, which would indicate a good place to be in terms of responding to opportunities in the digital economy. But again, a lot of that stuff is not happening in the Midlands and Northern English regions anyway. So you know, sort of manufacturing in these regions, we don't find, maybe because of the way multinationals declare their R&D, you don't necessarily find strong and obvious knowledge data building out of these, and they perform quite badly. In South Yorkshire is the worst, as far as you can see, in terms of opportunity, and again, West Midlands and East Yorkshire, Northern Lincolnshire, which perform badly on our opportunity measures. And the best, again, are all, apart from Cheshire, all seem to be in the south. I mean, that was before the big pharmaceutical company moved out of Cheshire. Yeah, that's what's going to Cambridge now, isn't it? So that might change the data a bit in terms of R&D, I would have thought. I think that's was in Cheshire when we did this data. So, you know, but we can see, you know, what's emerging now, and again, you can't see here properly, I guess, but in London, well, that's one nest to or two nest to areas because of the data change. In London is in the top kind of area in all of these variables. You know, in London, look, and out of London, to be fair as well, look really well placed to take advantage. You know, I've got to talk quite a lot of kind of small, nimble, knowledge-based manufacturing companies, obviously very highly qualified population, a lot of R&D in London. So it looks like London is going to get away with it again, as the kind of we would have it. And then finally, we add these two together to get a composite indicator of exposure and opportunity, and surprisingly, you know, again, the Midlands and the North of England or other bits that look most problematic in terms of opportunity and exposure. But one or two worries around the data. So, for example, we've used post-16 qualifications here. We could have used degree level qualifications. The reason we're using next 2 is because you can't get good occupational data for any area smaller than that in the UK. And you certainly can't do this across Europe, which is baffling to me. They look at the APS, General Population Survey, and if you want to work on populations in digital, you need fairly finely disaggregated occupational data, and it ain't there. So anything we want to do, which requires unknown occupations, is stuffed. It tends to be frustrating. I worry about Eastern Scotland there, because that really good showing is effectively oil. There's loads of R&D, there's loads of highly qualified workers in there, lots and lots of good stuff, you know, which is driving that, the Aberdeen economy effectively. But of course we know oil's on the way out. You know, so there's something about the variety measure there, which I think isn't picking up industries which may be declining long term, but still look very healthy. Obviously, there's still lots of investment in oil, capital formation in oil. There's still lots of activity in oil, but we know the period we're talking about, 10, 15 years or whatever it is, the oil industry will be gone, you know, or will all be good. So we need to worry a little bit about what these data are showing us in terms of individual regions, pardon me. But as I say, the scores are there, the numbers are behind the scores, so you can play with those and unweight them, reweight them, do whatever you want to them to see what comes out. So to finish then, what we often forget when we forget when we're working in this area, technology is not fate. The rollout of technology will be socially, politically mediated. We can or we can not allow Uber to work in our cities, for example. Uber just will stop working in London. We can or cannot allow Netflix to declare its profits in Luxembourg the Netherlands from British operations, which they've just done last week. So some of these things are certainly amenable to policy, but it's not clear to me that policy has a handle at any spatial scale on how to really grapple with the new digital economy and the way in which it's affecting. So what tends to happen here is, I give presentations like this and people say, oh well, that's all terrible, let's have universal basic income. Well, okay, well, wait a minute, maybe we will, but let's just think about whether we can, you know, we don't have to rush headlong into this world. We can think about what we want to do with this before we accept this as fate. Again, prior on technological incursion suggests that whatever we do in terms of moderating these technologies, certainly at a national level, there'll be winners and losers, and the winners will probably be the winners have been for the last 300 or 400 years, I suspect. Because there's lots of cumulative causalities. Again, I directed to my 2015 paper, for that this kind of post-Marxist structuralist view on how it is that regions function, and the regional functional hierarchy of the UK. But it's likely that the day we put together, actually, places which are okay will be even more than okay. Challenged places will be increasingly challenged in this digital world. The world, despite what we've been told, by the delightful Will Hutton, Thomas Friedman, remains unflat, it remains wakeful, people will agglomerate, aggregate, stuff will happen increasingly in cities and urban areas, so we need to think about that, and digital won't stop that. And unless we think very carefully about what well-connected, sustainable, prosperous, interesting small urban areas look like, or small rural market towns, then we'll be holding the tail tighter. So we need to think about how we think about allocation of space, planning, how we think about our various infrastructure, digital and real, in order to make sure that we move into the future with a more sensible approach to how we manage agglomeration. And as I say, I think we need to do is start building models with a sui generis, completely separate platform region which takes value out of all other regions. Because when you model this stuff as if you've got a level playing field and all regions are effectively the same, you're missing something. You know, Google, there was a presentation I was at last week where somebody was talking about in the digital economy moving up the global value chain, which is what we use these terms all the time, don't we? Regional movement. You know what? Google doesn't have a value chain. Google does have a supply chain. Yeah. Netflix, all right, it buys in film services wherever it can do it cheaply. But these companies, they sell directly to the consumer. They create the product, they manage the product, they service the product over time. It's a subscription model. The way in which we think about value creation as economists has to change to reflect the fact it doesn't happen anymore incrementally along a value chain between raw material and finished product. That's not how the world works. And increasing proportions of our money is being ploughed into companies, a handful of companies, who own the entire value creation process and decide how they create value and where they create value. It's almost like transfer pricing multiplied up to orders of magnitude greater in terms of a policy problem. And so far, I don't think we've really grasped understanding that challenge either as analysts or as policymakers. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Your end of the lesson. 1 hour,